fast. So if there are any other questions you want Tom to cover, please feel free to put that into the Q&A function at the bottom. So what I wanted to do just for the next 10, 15 minutes is just give a quick overview on how, if you want to use LandApp to prepare for an SFI, how you can use the new template we've delivered. And just as a note to reiterate what Tom's just said there is that mapping isn't essential for your SFI. However, what we do fundamentally believe is it can be a really good tool to get things organized and to provide an evidence base into the future. So what I'm hopefully going to demonstrate is how to design a plan, how to use all the different options and all the different standards and all the different actions, and then derive both the expected value of that scheme, as well as a nice pretty map and then a summary table that shows you what the application is made up of. So as per usual, the workflow starts by logging into the LandApp, creating a new map and hitting demo or giving the map a name. I'm just going to move my zoom out of the way. And you're plonked onto your map. And the first initial point for generating your plan is importing your RPA data. So your RLR land parcel data. And the way that you do this is you hit the import from Rural Payment Agency button at the top left, and you're met with this little pop-up screen. You will need your SBI number or your client's SBI number. And just remember, if you are using SBI number, make sure you've got permission as part of your end user license agreement you've signed up to using get permission before using an SBI number. There's 3 different data sets that you can download: land covers, land parcels, and hedgerows. For this demo, I'm actually only going to download land covers because I don't actually think you need land parcel data for this application. The reason is because the land cover contains your field ID numbers as well. And when you hit import, that's just a live connection between us and the RPA, and that plonks your field parcel data onto a nice map. And just for the demo, I'm going to use grayscale so we get a bit more contrast. As per usual, the first step that I always recommend is if you just go straight into a create project and basic payment scheme and create that from your land covers, that automatically turns your land covers from a blue project into your land covers being attributed. So our grasslands have now turned green, our woodland blocks have turned darker green, and there's some other bits and bobs happening around here, sports and recreation, ponds, etc. And so this is going to kind of act as a backdrop to our SFI application. And as a note, that workflow works for hedges as well. So if you create a project, basic payment and hedgerows, that will then pick up your hedgerows and plonk those onto the map where they are. So you can have both your hedgerows and your land covers on your plan. I'm just going to rename it so that's slightly clear for me and for everyone here. I'm not going to spend any time doing a basic payment apart from just for this demo, because I appreciate the farm I'm using is mostly grassland. I'm going to pretend, and I want you to use your imagination as well, that these fields down here are all in arable. So I'm actually going to put those all into barley for an example, just so then we can have a bit of diversity. And before I do this plan, just to give you a bit of context about the farm, because it is relevant to some of the actions I'm going to use, is there is a priority habitat involved in here. So if I turn on the priority habitat layer, which has been recently added, you can see that the top, this northern block field is actually good quality semi-improved grassland. And the rest of the grassland is fairly modified, improved. So there'll be 2 different grassland standards that go into those 2 different habitat types. And then the arable, just going to make it up, but let's pretend this is a part of the breadbasket of Britain. Other data layers that might be relevant, although not so for this farm, is there's some options that are only available, or you're not eligible if, for example, you're on peat. So just double check your peatland. There is a peatland data layer that you can toggle on, as well as some of the ones around wet grasslands. So maybe have a look at your flood zone layers, for example, and see if any of your grasslands would be eligible for the flooding. And then the final one, which I will be using, and sorry to rattle through this, I'm just keen to get to Q&A. There is also recently been added the contour lines as well. So OS terrain data has been added. So there are some actions that are only eligible on certain slopes. So just have a look at contours and work out where you might be eligible for those actions. So we've got our farm, we've got our basic payment mapped, which looks like this. We've got some modified, improved grassland along here, and we've got one species rich, or at least good quality species rich grassland up here. So the first step in this process is to create a project. And when you hit create project, you're obviously met with all the various templates we have. And today we're going to be talking about the SFI template. So I'm choosing the SFI, and I'm going to again create that from my land covers. And what this does is this brings down a completely blank template with no attributions, but through the demo, I'm going to keep my basic payment behind so I can see the different habitat types. And the first thing that we recommend is you put those land standards in based on the land covers. So as I mentioned, all of these fields along here are all improved grassland. So I'm going to put all of these into my improved grassland standard, and I'm just going to select a selection of them. I'm holding shift, by the way, when I do that. So I'm holding shift on my keyboard, allows me to select multiple. And then I assign, as you would for a basic payment or a countryside stewardship, I assign a land standard for that. And so these are improved grassland. So I go into my improved grassland tabs, and I'm met with all the various standards and actions that are relevant to my improved grassland. So there's some actions that we'll come back to in a minute around stocking density and soil management. But the first thing you want to do is add a land standard to those fields. So I can either go for introductory, intermediate. That's a typo. Tom might note down that it should say advanced instead of there's two intermediates, but yeah, IG3 is advanced. That's a typo on our behalf. So let's just say we're putting all of those into the intermediate grass standard. Once you do that, you can see that those field parcels have been colored in and everything else hasn't. A couple of things to flag up at that point is we've added links to the guidance for each of those fields. So if you want guidance about the improved grassland standard, the hyperlink will then be on that right-hand panel, so you can dive straight in to find out more about what DEFRA's ambitions are around that particular standard that you've applied. So that's me putting it into intermediate, and just to show you how we've designed it. This, by the way, there's not been an official guidance from DEFRA on how it gets colored or whether there's a code or not for each of the standards. So that might be flexible into the future. But for example, for these three improved grasslands, I may want to put it into the introductory. And the way that we've styled it is just that there's a slight darkness. The option gets darker as a higher standard, a higher level in the standard is achieved. And just to demonstrate that on the arable, let's just say I put these three into the arable and horticultural introductory, sorry, and then these three into intermediate or advanced. So that's first step, is just using your land covers, get all the fields that you want to go into a land standard into a land standard. So I'm going to put this one into the intermediate. And so there's a slight change in color there. Actually, the contrast on that isn't amazing, but there is difference. And again, that's automatically updated the guidance for your soil standard intermediate. Just to show you for that final step, this low input grassland, this priority habitat, I'm actually going to put into the low input grassland options. Just as a note, there are varying levels of actions available to each of the standards, and as DEFRA releases them, we will try our best to put them in, but do have a bit of patience if some get released and we don't get them in straight away. So let's just put that one into the advanced standard. So that's the basic principle, is you, of your agricultural land parcels, choose which land standards they go in first. So I got some intermediate, some advanced, and some introductory. Then the next step is then you can choose to add additional actions. So for example, for this single field, which is low input, I can go into this option and I can see what other actions can be added. So the only action you can actually add to a wet grassland at the moment, unless I'm wrong, Tom, please interrupt, is wet grassland management. And actually this field I know is on a hill and it's not going to be eligible for a wet grassland standard. So if I turn on this, it runs down into this valley, but I'm pretty confident that wouldn't go into any other additional actions. However, my improved grassland standards, I'm confident that all of those could at least go into some form of soil standard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to select all feature types. And what this does is this is now selected all of the grasslands that are in the same level as before. So actually, even though these 2 or 3 are in the introductory, I've selected all the intermediate ones. And what you want to do is to add a standard on top, to add an action on top of the standard, is first duplicate those features because they're a separate polygon that goes on top. So I'm hitting the duplicate button, and now I can go and change what I've selected. And actually, just to illustrate that first, is if I move all of these, I've just made an exact replica of everything I've selected. So if I just push back, that should go back like that, and then select my feature types. I'm then going to go into my improved grasslands and I'm going to choose an action to go on top of those standards. So for example, I can maintain permanent grass cover, I can manage stocking density, or I can do a soil management plan. So let's say for all of those grass fields, I'm doing a soil management plan. Oh, actually, I've made a mistake. Bear with me. Let me duplicate those again. So I push back, hit duplicate, and then put those duplicate ones into a soil management plan, like so. And what that does is that now adds red stripes on top of my green grasslands where I'm adding those standards. So I'm adding the soil standards on top, and they are, like I just demonstrated, that's a red line on top of my features. And so I've got two there. Tidy that up. So that's standards with on top is an action, and then that principle is the same for others as well. So let me go down to the arable and turn off those data layers for now. I'm selecting all of, say, the introductory arable ones, first duplicating those and then assigning those duplicates to an action that I'm choosing. So for example, I could be putting those into wintergreen cover. And what that does is that's just added wintergreen cover on top of my plan. Just finally, before we get onto the export, that's pretty much the principle you use for all of them. Obviously, there's different standards. If you're in moorland, I haven't gone through all the actions. Please read the guidance provided by DEFRA. I just wanted to show you the process of how we see the Land Act being used for that. And just to add, remember there are, hedgerow options and some linear feature options. You can either use the hedgerows that you've got previously mapped. So you may want to put all of these hedges into your hedgerow standard. The way that you can do that is just select all your hedges from your hedgerow layer by using the select all button, like so, and then just copy those into your sustainable farm incentive project. And now within my SFI project, I've got all the different hedgerows that I can add to an option. So hedgerow, standard, intermediate. So that's basically now taken all of my hedgerows. Well, actually, that's all of my external hedgerows, isn't it? That's all my half hedges for you BPS geeks out there. And actually, let me just put all of my hedgerows into intermediate as well. I've now mapped where I'm putting hedgerows into a standard, where I'm putting all my land standards on, and what actions I'm adding on top of those land standards. And that has now produced for me, hopefully, two main things to export. The first thing is your report. So if you click the report button at the top right and add project, I can get a high level summary of what my SFI application looks like. So in total, I'm putting in 300 hectares. Now this farm is only 120 hectares. And the reason why that number is so much greater is because there's some options that I've doubled up. So just don't be concerned if that number seems way above what your area is for your farm. But what that's enabled then is to work out in total what area is going into each of these different standards and what actions in total are going on top. So for example, of all my introductory standards, I've got 8.39 hectares. And I'm also on top of that putting the wintergreen cover. So that's the principle. And then hedgerow standard, you can see I'm putting in nearly 5 kilometers of hedgerow into my hedgerow standard. So that table can be exported, and actually for the application, I think, Tom, this is the main thing you need, which is just how much in total of your farm is going into each of the different standards. So this output will be enough, which you can download straight to Excel and then copy and paste into your SFI application. Or if you need a breakdown of the field numbers which contain these actions, this table view button takes you through it to a more detailed table view. So that will be row by row with the national field numbers, which option they're going into, and the total area. Plus, we have added the most recent payments. Now, again, we're pretty confident they're right. However, if DEFRA updates the payments and we don't know about it, this might be out of date. So we're trying to keep communication with DEFRA as best as possible. But you can also then export this as a table and then sum that column to work out, right, how much would that payment equate to at the end of your application. So that's a real whistle-stop tour of the template. I think we've released some guidance about SFI on those steps I've just explained on how to use it, which you can find within the help and guidance section at the bottom right. So if you search in here, sustainable farm incentive, I'm sure, is there a sustainable farm incentive? Yeah, how to create a sustainable farm incentive project. That will just give you a step-by-step guide to what I've just shown you. Let us know if there's any improvements you can make. This is just very much a proof of concept because it is still in pilot phase, but we want more and more people using it and feeding back as and when needed. So apart from that, I think we might as well move back to questions. If there are questions around what I've just shown you, happy to answer those. But I'd like to focus most of the questions, if I can, towards Defa and Tom, as you know, it's a bit of a privilege to have him here.